hands in the sky if you're feeling the vibe. This is the poet will be televised. Put your hands in the sky if you're feeling the vibe. This is the poet will be televised. Put your hands in the sky if you're feeling the vibe. This is the poet will be televised. Put your hands by your side, you feeling the vibe. This is the poet will be televised. Break it down.
Hello, hello, hello. This is Novella. Thank you for tuning in to the newly christened Poets to the People podcast on Sky's Crescent Radio. So once again, I am your host, Novella, singer-songwriter. And Poets to the People, just a little bit about us. We explore topics in today's social and political climate while enjoying highlighted clips from the monthly jam session. The Poet will be televised. And our panel always includes experts and artists so that you get a nice, rounded, creative, and factual things to ponder. I hope you enjoy it. So let's get into our panel. First, I'll introduce our esteemed guest, Stephanie D. Belnavis, wears many hats as a differently abled Jamaican board certified dance movement therapist, infant, parent, and early childhood mental health clinician, disability advocate, adjunct professor, independent photographer, and perinatal mental health specialist. Stephanie is also the founder of A Bucket of the Well, LLC, an embodied healing collaborative centering body liberation through kinesthetic, creative, perinatal, and conscious wellness for birthing families of color. This creative arts psychotherapeutic private practice that centers attachment and early relationships through embodied movement-based practices, trauma-focused generational healing, and creative wellness for BIPOC young children, their families, and adults with a deep commitment to social justice and racial equality. Stephanie specializes in multicultural mental health advocacy for perinatal birthing families and community partners within the US and the Caribbean diaspora, with a focus on the culturally affirming infant parent mental health and intergenerational trauma within communities of color, particularly immigrant families. So an immigrant herself, Stephanie's work is charged by seeking to create intersectional and decolonizing dialogue around diverse, inclusive, and equitable mental health and creative forms of healing, namely dance, movement, psychotherapy, and visual storytelling within underserved, marginalized communities that marry culturally empathetic social emotional practices, creative arts therapy interventions, and intergenerational studies within these communities. Stephanie has worked as a creative arts therapist, infant, parent, early childhood mental health clinician, and perinatal consultant in Boston, Massachusetts, wherein she provides clinical and experiential movement-based services to young children, their parents, caregivers, and their extended community supports. Stephanie has served as a mental health consultant to local preschools, child care centers, and public schools in the Boston area, providing teacher and staff consultation, parent and teacher trainings, school-based play and dance movement therapy, classroom and student observations, feedback sessions, and crisis intervention services when needed. Stephanie is also fueled by her passion as a creative, in which she is an avid advocate for sustainable creative health for all. Stephanie is the founder of the Diane Project, and the Diane Project births, both photography collaboratives are centered around elevating the intersectional stories of Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. TDP focuses on BIPOC visual storytelling through photojournalism and portrait photography, while TDPB is similarly aligned with a larger focus on celebrating the perinatal journeys of families of color, inclusive of successful and adverse childbirthing stories, experiences, and perinatal inequities. Stephanie is also the founder and lead photographer of Foresight, a print photojournal that chronicles the visuals and stories of BIPOC communities. Stephanie is a professor at Lesley University and a recent infant parent mental health fellow through Jewish Children and Family Services. Stephanie is a member of the American Dance Therapy Association's Multicultural and Diversity Committee and currently serves on their Black Magic Affinity Group. Stephanie was also recently appointed as the president of the New England American Dance Therapy Association. Thank you for being with us today, Stephanie.
Thank you for having me, everybody.
All right, so moving on. I'm going to read a shorter one just to give myself a break. I love all these bios though. Let's get into my favorite person in the whole wide world. McCalamine is a master of the craft, a 20-year veteran of New York City's independent hip hop movement. He has toured 13 countries over 10 years as an artist, educator, and ambassador. A published essayist and scholar, he is also the co-curator and producer of the Brooklyn Academy of Music's hip hop showcase, Word, Sound, Power. Welcome, McCalamine.
Hello, 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 hello. It's good to be here, as always.
Our next panelist is singer-songwriter Lee Anderson. Categorized as R&B soul, it is without a doubt that Lee Anderson has what the music industry has been waiting for. Through her own rhythm and blues, Lee Anderson aims to create an intimate connection between herself and anyone who has come in contact with her fluid soprano sound. Lee Anderson's music is a timeless entity, providing us with sounds enlaced with heartfelt melodies, strong vocals, and lyrics that tell the story of her past heartbreaks, current happiness, newfound self-love, and hopes for equality. Born in Washington, D.C., raised in South Carolina, now residing in New York, Lee Anderson's goal is to conquer the music industry note after note. As a member of the Actors Equity Association, Lee Anderson mastered orchestration, harmony, and melodies through musical theater. Through the wonderful world of theater, Lee Anderson performed her favorite shows, including Hair, Little Shop of Horrors, Ragtime, and Smokey Joe's Cafe. Now a staple of New York's live music scene, Lee has played venues from the Apollo, Rockwood Music Hall, Joe's Pub at the Public Theater, the Duplex, Duane Park, as well as the Make Music New York City Festival, just to name a few. She's worked with underground hip hop favorites such as John J.R. Robinson, J. Rawls, and Uni G. Through hip hop, Lee Anderson mastered the art of storytelling, which is evident in her songwriting ability. Her music has been compared to the sounds of Whitney Houston and Anita Baker, with reminiscences of Aaliyah. In March 2019, Lee Anderson independently released her first album entitled Pronounce Lee Deluxe. Her LP was recorded and mastered by Grammy-nominated and recipient of 16 Billboard Awards Demoet, and she collaborated with A-list producers such as rising composer Asante Amin, Road to Stardom winner Jessica Betts, and world-renowned guitarist Marcus Machado. Lee Anderson is also a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, as well as I am. All right. Next on our panel is Mr. Baxter Wordsworth. Baxter Wordsworth is eating a sandwich. He is a New York City native, a coffee enthusiast, and legendary MC. He is the host of End of the Week, the longest running weekly hip hop open mic in New York City, and has also held down the mast at the Poet Will Be televised jam session for poets and the poetic. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me. It's a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, if in case anybody was wondering.
That's terrible. Don't bring that foolishness on my show. I hate peanut butter and jelly, just for anyone listening. They're better separate. Anywho, moving on in the panel. We have Mr. Jason Marshall. Jason Marshall's 2003 arrival in New York City signified the continuation of hard-swinging, forward-thinking baritone saxophone playing. With early encouragement to appreciate all types of music, Jason has developed a style that encompasses with the whole of African American music. A special interest is given to the amalgamation of soul, R&B, and funk with straight-ahead jazz. Years of dedication and perseverance have resulted in a giant soulful sound and instantly appealing concept. Influences such as Leo Parker, Nick Brignolia, and Bruce Johnstone have coalesced to ensure an open perception of the baritone sax and a take-no-prisoners approach to playing jazz music. Jason has studied with no less than the elite baritone saxophone specialists of the 20th century, including Hamiet Bleuet, Ronnie Cuber, and Gary Smulyan. I feel like I'm being disrespectful with these names. I'm like, shouldn't I know how to pronounce these names? Anyway, these three masters of the instrument have contributed invaluably to Jason Marshall's ability, each one pouring their own personal wealth of knowledge into him. Other teachers include altoist Bruce Williams, Mark Gross, Steve Wilson, Vincent Herring, and tenor saxophone players Greg Tardy, Wayne Escoffrey, and Paul Carr. Mr. Lorenz Wheatley garners special distinction as being Jason's first saxophone teacher and earliest source of musical direction. Jason's formative musical experiences include stints with the Thad Wilson Jazz Orchestra and bluesman Roy Gaines. He is currently playing and touring with Roy Hargrove's band RH Factor and the Roy Hargrove Big Band. Jason's band, Overt Negritude, has released its debut self-titled album. Jason has also conducted numerous demonstrations, clinics, and workshops at every level of education throughout the world. Welcome, Jason. You're muted.
Thank you. Unmuted. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you.
Thank you everyone for being on the panel. And I do want to introduce also the founder of Sky's Crescent Radio, Jade Zabrick, who is our esteemed sound engineer today. Jade Zabrick is your friendly neighborhood troubadour, an Air Force veteran, native Texan, and the founder of Sky's Crescent Radio. She has been a member of the Poet Will Be Televised band for over 5 years, and she is also the leader of the Train Walkers hip hop rock band. Thank you for having us, Jade.
Thank you.
Right. And Macau, do you have anything to say before we get into our first video?
Yes, hailing from the low country of South Carolina, Dale Novella is an entrepreneur, yogi, teaching artist, activist, educator, performer, who is the host and founder of Poet to the People podcast, as well as the Poet Will Be Televised. Dale Novella presents. Thank you for having us all here today.
Appreciate y'all.
Yes, sir. Let's get it.
Thank you. So let's get into our first video. This is Phoenix Flicks with Emotions.
I had a couple drinks. How many people had a bad week? Who had a bad week? You had a bad week? Maybe something went wrong? Alright, so this is for you. Fuck an emotion. It's just a notion that you allow yourself to turn into emotion so you become motionless because your body begins to ache and it gets harder and harder to wake. And you try, but that feeling you can't seem to shake. You need to wake up and realize what's really at stake. Your focus and perseverance and emotion is just an interference, interfering with your creativity and your productivity, therefore making it hard to go about your daily activities. It fucks with your inspiration, creating unnecessary frustration. But you need to remind yourself that emotion is just a creation, something you've created in your mind. I'm sorry, but you need to leave those emotions behind. Stop allowing yourself to be confined by the emotional floors of mankind. You need to start thinking outside of what those emotions have outlined. You need to get up and get on your grind because there is a ladder out there that you were intended to climb. And you cannot sit and waste your day. Please listen to the quote that I'm about to say. Procrastination is a thief of life, and you're inflicting a wound with an imaginary knife. So why put off what you can do now for tomorrow? Why allow yourself to drown in your own sorrow? That hourglass has no grains of sand for you to borrow, and that clock keeps ticking, and there's no time for you to be splitting your attention. But oh, did I mention that you should fuck the emotional stress? You need to exhale and get that shit off your chest, and learn how to invest into things that can only lead to your success. Believe me when I say that great things can happen, and you'd be surprised at what you can create when you don't let negative emotions participate.
All right, that was Phoenix Flicks with Emotions. So I wanted to get started in this panel because we all love hip hop, right? We're in the Northeast. It's kind of like required. I wanted to get started with a top 5 list. So what are your top 5 physical warning signs that you are under a lot of stress?
I can go first. I tend to get a shorter attention span. I also find myself losing patience quicker. I definitely feel more exhausted and fatigued, as well as I I tend to actually get sick. Usually when I'm getting ill, I very rarely get like really sick. But when I'm actually like just like physically or just stressed out for whatever reason, that's when I get sick. So that's usually a sign that I'm stressed out when I get sick in some way, cough, congestion, unable to breathe, and then loss of appetite. Like I don't feel like eating at all when I'm stressed.
Yeah, I think a lot of those are common. Those are pretty much, I don't lose as much patience, I don't think, but I do get disoriented. But those are pretty much mine as well.
Without a shadow of a doubt, as my neck gets tight, like my back gets super tight. That sometimes I don't even think I'm stressed, and then my neck starts hurting, and I gotta like readjust and be like, wait, am I stressing out over something? And 10 out of 10, the answer is yes. That I tend to grind my teeth more when I'm stressed. Um, I am at the same time I am restless and also lethargic. So it's like I feel tired all the time and I lay down all the time, but I don't do a lot of sleeping, which is a weird place to be. Is that 5? I feel like that could just 4 or something like that. I don't know.
You should know how to do this, hip-hop person.
I'm stressed. I think there was one more, but I can't think of it right now, so I'll let someone else.
Forgetfulness.
Forgetfulness. More evidence that I'm stressed right now.
Oh no.
I guess I could go next, right?
Yes.
I feel like I'm already in a combination with Macau and Baxter, as far as I get a lot of attention right here too, as well. And sometimes I do forget to eat. That's another thing, because I always have that mindset of, oh, I gotta do this, I gotta do this, I gotta do this, I gotta do this. Oh my gosh. And, and so I get a little bit overwhelmed, and I don't even realize I'm overwhelmed until I'm like realizing that someone's trying to talk to me, and I'm like, wait, I'm thinking about something else, or I'm trying to sleep and I'm like, no, I gotta wake up and I gotta do this. And so it just takes a breather, but talking about it and writing things down just kind of helps alleviate that stress. And so I rarely have gotten stressed lately, but it still occurs. It's just manageable, I think.
Yeah. Learning how to manage. I have another question for that, but let's get to Jason and Stephanie. Like, what are your top 5s?
I don't know how this is going to sound, but I know that I'm stressed out when I haven't done laundry. Like when I see the laundry pile up, I know I got a lot going on. My day in general is pretty regimented because I do a lot of stuff. And in order for me to do those, to get to everything, I have to kind of pack every day in. And so when I start missing the things that I do if I miss a workout, if I miss a, gym, weightlifting, yoga, whatever, if I start to miss stuff and I'm looking at a calendar that I got, I start to see holes in the calendar, I know my stress level is going up. So missed workouts, laundry piling up. If I eat more than twice a day, I know that I'm stressed because I usually eat once in a day. And if I eat again, it'd be like watermelon or something easy. You know what I mean? But I have usually one meal. If I eat more than twice in a day, I know I'm stressed. And if I haven't been practicing my horn, then I know I have a lot going on. So that's 4. And then if either of my parents call me and say, "Hey, I'm just checking in," because I talk to my folks a lot, but if they got to call me, I know I got a lot going on. So those are my things.
Yeah, I would definitely echo a lot of what Jason is saying. I think the physical manifestation is always compounded in noticing very distinct changes between my relationship with self and others. So like you're talking about, like if you folks call you, absolutely.
I think the most primary thing is my sleep pattern. If I'm not getting deep sleep, I'm historically someone who can naturally wake up early. Like I don't need an alarm. And if I'm like struggling to wake up and stay awake, or I'm like needing to nap in the day, like there's something that definitely is indicating that I'm stressed. My appetite also really changes, where it's like, oh my God, did I eat today? Like, the forgetfulness, as some folks were saying before, like that kind of compounds it. Um, if I'm not as engaged, I definitely see myself as an ambivert. So it's like introvert and extrovert. And if there are like distinct changes or long periods of not engaging with other like very extensive periods, and I'm like, what is going on? That's like an indicator for me. Um, Jason said the laundry piece. I think for me, it's the cleanliness piece. So if I'm not able to do like my typical weekly routines, whether I'm like, oh, I don't have time, or I'm like too fatigued to do it, like that is a very distinct indicator, because um, and I'm Caribbean, so we do things like season our bathroom when we're cleaning it and stuff. Like if I'm not doing a proper clean at the house at least like once or twice a week, like that is an indicator that like I'm either not providing enough time for myself, or like I'm really physically stressed, and this is how it's manifesting. Had said the forgetfulness stuff. Yeah, I don't know if I did 5, but I think those are like the main ones. And if I'm not able to maintain kind of consistent relationships with or contact with my loved ones, that's a very clear distinction of like, wait, what's going on? Yeah.
It's very interesting. All of us had like little bits that were overlapping and things like that. Starting with Stephanie, what are ways that we can help manage our stress levels?
I'll definitely start with noticing, as you said, like everyone is very, very different. So what may work for somebody else may absolutely not work for the other people. I think at the central like core of understanding yourself, I would recommend really just assessing what your typical flow of the day is and what it has become, or how does it shift or change when um, life happens. I'll say life happens, because stress can be, starts to rain, or like, or like a significant things happen. There's a loss or something. So really kind of assessing what are you noticing you are accessing, and what are you not accessing or not feeling like you can physically or mentally access when you do experience these changes. Yeah. Wait, ask the question one more time, because I feel like there's another part that I forgot.
What are ways that we can help manage our stress levels?
Yeah, I think also as well, like going back into assessing what are the relationships that are supportive. So that could be, having relationships that kind of hold you accountable, in a positive, healthy way. I think is something to also help you to, because sometimes we have blinders on and we can't actually see how we're manifesting in our lives. And if you have trusting relationships, and also building that with yourself, like yourself, your body is a blueprint. How are you eating, how are you sleeping, how are you engaging when you have to engage with others, in those basic ways. I think those are like the central spaces that people will kind of take from it, where take what lands for them in that way. But really, and then as a therapist, I'm definitely going to check in with like, therapy is not necessarily for everybody, but I do think it's important to have at least an objective relationship, whether it's religious or spiritual, familial or therapeutic, that is really kind of intentionally holding space for you. That is not a burden to others, and not a burden to yourself. So really kind of like having that space that you can always go to, or activity that you can also go to. So a lot of folks do like yoga, or like, body oriented somatic work to really kind of activate the body to heal. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
I hope
But
I
I,
answered your question.
yes, you did. That was brilliant. And the rest of the panel, who has some stress management skills they'd like to share? I see Lee's little finger.
Yes, my little finger. Um, Yeah, she was saying what Stephanie was saying was that you really have to know yourself. And with me, like getting to know myself, I know that I am more of an empath and definitely more of a sensitive person when it comes to like feeling under other energies. So just staying like managing the intake of other energies is basically what helps my stress 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 level go down. And I made a list. So I do a lot of crystal work. So I keep a lot of crystals around me. Like whenever I have to sing or if I have to speak somewhere, I always make sure that I have either an amethyst, a rose quartz, or a white quartz that Dale and I got matching white quartz
I
from
can't
my
find
first
mine. I
powwow.
think you stole mine so you could have extra
Yours is
power.
more round than mine.
It's
But
probably still in the house somewhere.
it's probably in mama's house. I do breath work, so a lot of breathing techniques. I do a body scan when I'm doing my breath work, or even if I'm just talking to somebody and I feel like, where am I holding tension? Sometimes in my feet. So I just try to release whatever tension's there. I draw and I doodle. That's what keeps my stress level down. It just kind of like cleanses my mind. Working out, I find myself to be even more irritable if I'm not doing yoga, which I have to watch out for. When you're in a relationship with somebody, you don't want to be irritable. And definitely comfort food. So that's another thing. So I make sure that I have, like, I try to practice. I'm a part-time vegan, but sometimes crab legs, sometimes adding, cheddar cheese into something just betters your mood, and it does alleviate stress too.
Mm. And when you say, I would ask you, I am going to ask you to define part-time vegan. What does part-time vegan mean?
Part-time vegan means, well, it's a new phrase for me because, I practiced veganism for 5 years, and this past year I wasn't. But part-time vegan means that most of the time I'm vegan, like between 20, 30 hours a week, but if something arises where it's something that I just want to try, I'm not gonna restrain myself from that curiosity. I'm not going to live uncomfortably. If I want to have something, I'm just going to go ahead and eat it. If I want pizza, I'll eat it. I'm not going to be mentally like, oh, I can't eat it because it's cheese. Oh, I'm going to be hungry. I'm not going to starve myself for the diet. I'm going to live plant-based, but I'm not going to make myself suffer in the process. Did that make sense?
Explaining that.
It does, because I'm just going to try to say I lived that life, Lee, for
Yeah.
a minute. There was a point where I actually was a raw foodist for a very brief period of time, and at some point I changed my diet to so like, yeah, if I want to have meat, I'll have it, but only really chicken or fish. But like, yeah, it's just I realized it wasn't so much about whether I was eating plant or meat. It was like what types, how much of it, when that was the more important thing than eating the meat. For me, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is that how you manage your stress levels, Miguel?
I manage my stress levels by slowing down. So I think similar to what Jason and Stephanie were mentioning, like I pack a lot into a day. I have a lot of responsibilities in my work. So really just slowing myself down and taking a moment to sort of like sit, breathe. Also, I check if I've drank water. Ironically enough, if I drink water, or if I haven't drank water, I realize like that's contributing to it. So sometimes like, you know what, I might be dehydrated and I'm just like running on empty. So those are the ways that I try to do it. I try to find an opportunity to be still. One of the things the pandemic helped me do, because we're working from home, is like I actually get up in the morning and like that's like my like set time. So fortunately, like I will take that hour before I have to do anything and really just be still. Like I feed the cat, make coffee, make breakfast, and I actually like lean into eating the meal like it's a meal. I don't just like, okay, I got 20 minutes, let me put this together, scarf it up, got a meeting. It's like, nope, because breakfast was my favorite meal. So it's like I'm gonna sit down and like actually have breakfast and take that time. So that's what I
Put
do.
in a lot of work for breakfast. It's like the one meal I know that you're going to actually cook. You're going to chop up the vegetables. You're going to like okay.
Yeah, I actually cook breakfast. I cook my breakfast, yeah. Usually. Not all the time, but usually.
When you don't, I'm just curious too, for my own benefit, because I have been putting more energy into breakfast. But when you don't cook your breakfast, what do you usually go to? Like, what's your go-to? Is it granola or cereal or?
Yeah, it's either granola, and if I'm really trying to be like truly healthy, I'll basically just give myself a bowl of fruit. Bowl of fruit, like a full, like a big bowl of fruit. I'm really into like berries and grapes, so I'll get like a big bowl of fruit, my coffee, some water. If I'm really like, because granola, I realize like I like it because that's like my sweet tooth thing, but granola's a lot of fat and a lot of stuff. It gives me protein, but so that's when I'm like, okay, I'm kind of kind of going overboard here because I have like the chocolate peanut butter granola and just make sure I'm not having like a big bowl of it. But yeah, if I'm trying to stay to like, I usually have like a scramble that I use with vegetables. I usually make that either with eggs or tofu, typically tofu. But yeah, that and the fruit is when I'm like, okay, I need to like, and also like my digestive and everything else. Like I found like the lighter foods are actually foods that my body uses, and that's the other thing about stress too for me. I know I'm stressed if I'm eating heavier foods. Like the denser the food usually means I'm stressed, which helps. That makes me slow down even more. So when I eat lighter, doesn't necessarily mean portion, but just the type of food. My energy level is better because the food is actually, I'm getting more nutrients into actually having it to deal with the waste and kind of like processing the waste.
So we haven't heard from Jason or Baxter yet. Would y'all like to
Yeah,
share?
I'm happy to share. I'm happy to share. And this is about stress relief, correct?
Yeah, managing your stress levels.
Yeah. So, what I found is that, particularly with black men here, we don't really know often what is stressing us out because it's been so normalized. Like it's like almost like hard candy. You know what I'm saying? Like it's it feel permanent. So you start ignoring it. And what I found for me is that working out helped break through some of those layers. And so a lot of time when I get this question, I'll say, go do something where you sweat intensely for an hour. Because what will happen is that about you'll want to quit at about 30 minutes. You might want to quit at 15 minutes, but after you want to quit but you don't quit, you ascend into a new level of awareness. And that new awareness to me start to relieve the stress because now you know what's bothering you rather than I'm tense and my temper's short, but I don't know why. So I'm gonna just manage with a short temper and all of this tension. So working out and working out is kind of like resistance, weightlifting, or cardio, which is persistence. So I'm saying persistence kind of working out. I mean, not to say weightlifting ain't good for that because it is, but for me, um, you know, like I got a 10-mile run tonight, and I'm already kind of making notes of what I'm gonna work out mentally during the run because I'm gonna want to quit at about 5 miles. But at 6 miles, I will have come up with a new thing, and now I won't have to worry. Like I won't have to pace the floor and pine and worry about that because I'll know. And then at mile 7, it'll be another thing, and then mile 8, it'll be something else. And then um, by the time the run is over and I'll be walking home, then I'll be putting all the pieces together, and then I'll have some resolution. So for me, that's the big thing. And then it takes me a long time to wind down at the end of a day. And so that can end up meaning I don't sleep more than an hour at night if I don't actively try and decompress or like aim at going to sleep. Because I'll just go and go and go, and as if don't nothing bad happen, so to speak, I'll keep going, right? So, in terms of you know managing stress, I think discovering quite what the stressors are through physical exertion for me is square one. Like, let's figure it out. Because brothers, we don't even now. I mean, as therapy becomes more and more of a thing and wellness becomes more and more of a popular subject, we still don't have a lot of avenues to deal with this. And so for me, until therapy for Black men is more normalized, I'm saying let's develop things ourselves to help therapeutic activities. You know what I'm saying? That don't end up, or I should say, that have more of a long term value than short term therapeutic stuff. Because we got a lot of short term therapy stuff that don't actually be that healthy. It just feels good for a little while.
Yeah. Would that be your first tip to give someone, like to figure out?
I tell brothers, I say, hey, let's go for a walk. You know, because a lot of times we haven't done anything but work and sleep. So I'm saying, let's go for a walk just to go for a walk, and then on the next time, hey, let's run from here to the corner, and then walk the rest of the time. And then let's run from here to the corner, and then from that corner to the next corner, then we walk the rest of the time. And eventually, we get running around the whole block, and all the while, it's breaking down the barriers. So for me, that's like square one. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I just add really quickly to what Jason? I know Baxter is also going to share, but I just really wanted to like reinforce what Jason is saying in terms of the physical manifestation of stress in our bodies and the importance of having a body oriented practice. And as he's describing this idea of like working out, it could be going for a walk, it could be, you know, really chill. I know Leah had mentioned the idea of breath work. It's choosing to, and also getting support around how to tap into your body's response. I do think the dieting piece is also a very, very important part of it in terms of habits and how does that impact your ability to be able to be connected to self in that as well. So I just wanted to echo what they were saying, because a lot of folks feel like stress is this external thing that like can consume you, and oftentimes it's very interpersonal. And very individualistic in terms of how it shows up in our bodies, and then that translates to how it shows up in our relationships. So I just wanted to echo that, and I'll pass it over to Baxter.
I mean, I'm just going to echo everything that everybody said. I think, you know, if I'm talking about me specifically, it's a lot of a little bit of everything. The exercise is 100%. Like I co-sign that 100%. Like I think we often overlook the obvious because it seems so obvious, right? Like you're feeling bad, you're feeling stressed, and it's like work out. And it's like, yeah, I'm gonna work out. But yeah. It's like, no. Stop, work out, exercise. Like do it every day, and you will be shocked with the clarity of mind, or just the how good you feel about yourself for doing it. So I 100% agree with that. I also want to say, like, kind of to Stephanie's point, is like if you kind of take a step away from, how do I say this, like consequence, or take a step away from like things happening to you, and like be deliberate and be have a conversation with yourself, because I think human beings oftentimes don't realize the faculty they have in a lot of their stress and a lot of their situations, right? Like, you know, I used to, if I was running late for work, I'd be on the train stressed the whole ride. But then you ask yourself, if you, and I work it through in my head, is like, being stressed doesn't get me there any faster. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like worrying about, like I've done everything that I possibly could to get there as quick as I possibly could. Like I like got dressed, I like ran to the train station, and I got on the train. Now the train's going to get there when it gets there, and whatever's going to happen is going to happen whether I stress about it or not. And sort of like having those conversations with myself, what I call like talking myself off the ledge, like helps out immensely, you know? Reevaluating what options I have in certain situations. You know, like if you lose your wallet, right, and you're upset about it, like you it's a valid feeling to be upset. You should allow yourself that feeling, but then it gets to a point where like being upset doesn't lend itself to a solution, doesn't lend itself to yourself, you're feeling better. So all you can do is like, all right, well, I've already lost it, let me like start handling what I need to handle to get my stuff back, or to like, you know, cancel my credit cards, and just having that sort of deliberate mind about those things. Yeah.
I wanted to add something, because I remembered fasting. Sometimes when I feel stressed or I want to manage whatever I'm dealing with better or more effectively, I stop eating because I find we use a lot of emotional energy thinking about food, going to get food, making food, digesting food, doing dishes, like all of we devote a lot of energy to food. And I find that if I stop eating and just drink water, it it allows me to dedicate more energy to other things.
And we also kind of ignore like we what we eat, how that affects our emotional state, because like what you're saying makes perfect sense, because like what's the clearest, most pure thing you could put in your body besides water, right? So like by fasting and intaking water, you're kind of like resetting your disposition, like you're resetting yourself, and that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
So
Just
before
also
we get
wanted to
into
name as well, like sometimes as well, like there's different types of stress too. So also navigating these different routines and responses for when stress is something that's possibly beneficial for you, and also when it really isn't. So,
Mhm.
for example, if it's really thinking about like rest as a part of your, you know, reaction to a stress response, but then how could that also be beneficial for you?
Mhm.
So it's also wanted to name that there's like different types of stress too that could actually be helpful or motivating. And then there's the other forms that really feel like they maybe deplete and take away in more of a negative way.
how do we know in our bodies when stress is the problem or if it's something else? Like mental health, we all agree that mental health it affects our physical health, right? But sometimes I know like a while ago I was really sick and my mental health was probably making me more sick or like expediting my illness. But I actually did was actually very physically ill. So what are steps that you would take in that situation if you're like this has been going on for a long time? I've done my wellness routine. I've done all of the things that I need to do to manage my stress, and I still feel lethargic or forgetful,
Yeah.
or my appetite's still off. What would you do?
I would say get a water filter first.
Mm.
Like if you really can't chase down whatever the thing is, I would say get a water filter and get an air filter. Because sometimes, especially in the city, like we have mold, you know,
Yeah.
we it might be something in the water that you can't
So
even
much
taste.
lead. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? It'd be all kind of stuff like that in the city. Um, and you know, th- you know, water filter, a air purifier, uh, and the human body's a pretty intelligent organism if you just let it do what it's got to do,
And if you listen
right?
to it.
That's what I'm saying. Sometimes you might not know what listening means, so what I'm saying is like
No, yeah.
stop, just
Yeah.
stop, and I find that when we really can't figure it out, it's because we're not we don't consider the mundane and the innocuous stuff, like it don't be like, oh, I eat a bag of Oreos every day for breakfast. It's like everything is regular. You know what I'm saying? I wake up, I have bacon and eggs for breakfast, a cup of coffee, I have a turkey sandwich with chips for lunch, I have whatever, Salisbury steak with mashed potatoes and green peas for dinner, I go to bed, like normal, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it often is the normal stuff to be pushing you over the edge and you don't know, because it's not bad. It's normal. You know what I mean? Or it's like, hey, pizza on the weekends, TV dinner during the week, cereal for breakfast, like if you just stop, and when people stop, they start to get sick. They say, well, something is wrong. It's like, yeah, you're detoxing.
Yep.
And so a lot of times you gotta know the detox is coming, because that can in the beginning feel worse. And so if you don't know, uh, hit pause on everything, because none of us are like near starving. I'm not saying we're all living high on the hog. I'm just saying, like, it take a while to get to actual starving.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, you can go a few weeks without eating before you get to starving.
Mm-hmm.
Also, hunger is, you know, come and go in waves. So, you know, but if you stop, your body will start to say things that you might not understand, but it'll at least have an opportunity to go through those changes. But I would start to clean up the mundane things. Also, you know, like makeup, soaps, cleaning products. You know, you might be scrubbing your tub with something that's making you sick, because then you get in the tub and you bathing in that thing,
Yep.
and you don't know, because it's not like you eating it. You know, it's not like you even aware of it after the tub is spotless.
But your
But
skin is your biggest organ.
there you go. So
Yeah.
could be all them kind of things. Go ahead.
It's just troubleshooting, right? It's the same way you troubleshoot a computer. It's like you try something to see if it fixes the issue, and if it doesn't, you got to try something else.
Yeah.
But like, you know, to Jason's point, it's I guess what everybody is saying. A lot of it is just being is like looking for it, though, right? Like looking for the thing that makes you feel different. Because oftentimes we never really take that into consideration. We don't take into consideration our diet if we have other issues. You know, like your knee might be hurting you. You don't think it's maybe I need to cut down on dairy or something like that. But a lot of that is often connected. If you find yourself also to Jason's point, if you find yourself traveling, ask yourself if you feel different in other places than you do at home, because then that's evidence that maybe something at home is doing that to you, you know. And it's so interesting how people are willing to like ignore those things. This is a quick anecdote that I'm going to tell, but you know, I'll try to be quick about it, but I think it's interesting.
Baxter loves anecdotes.
I mean, anecdotes are interesting. They give us perspective. But I was working with this guy, right? I was working with this young kid. He's like 20 something years old. He's telling me he's like, like my hip's been hurting me, right? So I've been on this planet longer than he has. So I try to give him like some knowledge and wisdom. It's like, yo, when you feel stress in one place of your body, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's where the tightness is. You should stretch your entire body, because it could be someplace else that's tight, but that's where you're feeling it. And I try to explain this to all him, but he like ignores. He's like, no, I don't think it's that. It's like I went to this doctor and blah blah blah. I'm like, all right, and I'm telling you, like, it's because you're stressed. Like you're stressed about something. Your body's getting tight and you're feeling it in your hip. We were sitting there. He got a text from his dad, I think it was, and he started like complaining about some family issue. Then literally minutes later, he starts talking about his hip is hurting him. And I'm like, see, like you literally just got stressed, and now like you're feeling it. Like this is evidence that this is happening. He just, no, that like he just would not believe it, because he's so used to like, my hip hurts, I go to the doctor, they give me medicine, and then that's how it works. And I'm like, well, I can only do so much. I can only try to help so much, because like people aren't often willing to like pay attention to the like Jason said, to the minutia, to the little changes and little details that is evidence of like larger things.
Yeah.
I just also wanted to add, like, the body is your blueprint, like, to everything. And so I think, just to add to what both of you are saying, is developing a practice that you are doing this kind of kinesthetic inventory on an ongoing basis, right? Because we're always encountering things. And again, some of these stuff is it's positive, it's good. It's like, oh, okay, this is really allowing me to be able to access myself in a different way. But also understanding that for lots of folks, when it comes to stress, they're not necessarily either socialized or culturally conscious enough to understand the investment in self-awareness, right? So again, this conscious inventory is could feel like it's only certain people that can access it, when we all have our bodies, right? It's the one thing that we have, right? But it's shifting, I think, your mental state, your emotional state, your physical state, sometimes like your physical space, your relationships, to be able to say, listen, I am noticing this pattern in how I'm responding, and believing that the way in which you can address it or push through it is through listening more to your body. So actually creating a reflective practice around self, valuing and adding energy towards that. When we talked before about like feeling like I don't have enough time, like I just, the world is moving and we have to kind of catch up with it. When it's like, well, how are you? Are you just existing, or are you thriving through this world that you're trying to be a part of in this way. So offering this idea of like kinesthetic inventory, really on a somatic level, on a body. If you don't know what somatic means, on a body-based level, body-oriented level, what's going on. And that was, I think, that's a really good example, Bax, of like, a lot of things are connected to our experiences, and we hold these experiences in our body. So how do we unpack that, like, address, encounter it even, and then also push past to be able to heal. And maybe for some folks, healing may feel like too deep. Like that's I'm not trying to heal. I'm just trying to like not be stressed. Well, whatever language feels accessible to folks. But I think things like journaling, if you're somebody who's like, I don't like to write, okay, so everyone has electronics for the most part. You can, write a note, you can send an email to yourself. You can create an inventory, however it feels accessible, but it's
You can draw, right?
Right, you can
Do
draw.
an
Yeah,
art journal.
You could do voice
a junk
notes.
Like I
journal.
said, doodling, yeah.
Yeah, I was also gonna say as well the connection to your creative practice, and again, we oftentimes hear the narrative of like, well, I'm not a singer, I'm not a poet, I'm not a dancer, I'm not a, I was like, yeah, okay, but you have access to these ways of these activities, right? Like you'd engage with it without the title. So if it's something that you'd naturally do, explore that some more in that way. So creating an inventory for yourself is something that I'm always encouraging folks, and even for myself, just really being like, wait, what is? And as Jason said, sometimes you do need to withdraw in a protective way to be like, whoa, and doing that unapologetically sometimes, being like, it's not about anybody else. I just need to kind of recalibrate a little bit and figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in really quick. Oh, go ahead, Lee.
Okay, no, it's fine. I could go last. It's fine. Oh, okay.
Cal's been very quiet. He's been very courteous.
Lee, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Gosh, okay. Well, I have the questions here too. That's why I keep looking down. But you say, does mental health affect the physical health? And yeah, I don't know why I lost my train of thought. Just that whole courteous, active moment that Mikal had. So anyway, yeah, I think that your mental health, like what's going on in your head, how you're treating your body, it does show up on your body. And I think it's most evident, especially since you, as a yoga teacher, I'm sure you know how your experiences affect your chakras, and your chakras, if they're aligned, that could reflect in your mental health and your body health too. Especially like for women, our yellow chakra is very important to be open because that does directly affect us. Like it just does. I don't really know how to. You could.
We're told to squish it down. All
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
your solar plexus is where the ego lives, and a healthy ego. Like we're taught not to have an ego, right? But everyone has one, and it needs to be a healthy size. Too big, you're gonna you're gonna be off. Too low, and you just don't have any self-esteem, right? So you need to be right in the middle. But yes, when you're socialized as female, you're usually encouraged to squash that ego altogether and to be humble. And it really means not to think about yourself, and that can lead to diseases. There are certain diseases that women of color have that like other populations don't have a huge problem with. And I think stress and this disregard for our own bodies, like this learned behavior, is part of that problem.
Absolutely. That's a whole nother episode that you probably should do. But for me, whenever I feel a little bit off, and I have felt off before, like there was a time in my life, a short period of my life, where I was having 2 periods in the month, and I was just very, very sick, and I didn't even know that I had a whole stomach infection. But I would say this, that I had a stomach infection that got so bad that it got into my intestines, it got into my reproductive system, and it was just a big sensitive mess that I had to clean up. And one of the things that really helped me through that was Dale held my hand through it, by the way. But one of the things that really helped me was going through a cleanse. I gave up coffee, I gave up alcohol, I gave up meat, and that drove me to become vegan to begin with, just because I really want to heal my infection. But cleansing is definitely one of the first things that I would do if I ever felt like I was going down that route again. I would have my salt water. I would do everything that I can to just rid my body of the toxins that we don't know that we've been, consuming. Apples a day, that helps. Not wearing nail polish, that helps. Totally switching your whole makeup line to a vegan product. So when your skin does suck it all in, it's sucking up things that'll actually help your organs. And just overall, like doing yoga, because yoga is actually a fitness program that helps your inside as well as the outside. So doing all those things is just something that I would immediately incorporate into my life if I ever felt like I was getting another deadly infection. So,
Yes, thank you for that.
yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I just wanted to add, and it was just picking, I mean, we've all been some really great things in terms of, dealing with stress that anyone can pick up on. But, in particular, what Stephanie was talking a little bit about how we all don't necessarily, some of the things that we're talking about, like with chakras or Jason with fasting, those things can feel like maybe not what we have access to. And all of us aren't necessarily steeped in those languages. And Jason talking also about some other things, it made me realize, like, the way, especially in, I feel, the Black community, we're taught to deal with stress is avoidance. So we utilize things that help us sort of push the stress away. And what I'm hearing from all of us in all of our examples and what we're doing, we're talking about maintenance. And stress is an indicator that there's maintenance that's needed on the body, on the spirit, and that there's actually very simple things like drinking some more water or thinking about what you're ingesting. That I think that I feel like it's very powerful what we're talking about, because I do think about that, especially, working with young people in the city and the access that they have to some of these sort of like higher ideas, and they think that like health and wellness are things that are for people that have money or that have access, and really it's not the case. It's because of how it's packaged, is how we talk about it. It could just simply be like, hey, you know what? Maybe that food that you're eating, maybe instead of picking up, the double fudge cookie because you tight, go get some grapes, or get an apple, or I'm really stressed out and I just want to have my favorite carbonated soda drink. Maybe it's like, I know one of the things I like to drink water. Dale drinks water all day as well. I realized like I actually like carbonated water. So we have like a soda stream. And it's water and it's carbonated. There's nothing else in it. But it's like, I think about that with my young people. It's like, you know what? You should, instead of when you go into the corner store and you put that $1.50 down for the soda, get like a seltzer water. Drink water.
Water with a little bit of lime or something.
Yeah. So it's just, a lot of the things that I'm picking up on, that I'm hearing from everyone, it's really about maintenance. When dealing with stress and figuring out what are the things that we need to sort of like take care of and rebuild and restore and find ways to get out of the habit of the avoidance, because the stress is not actually going to go away until there's things that we do to sort of either replenish or refresh or restore whatever energies that we need to sort of kind of push through. Because I think Stephanie said it earlier, like, stress isn't inherently a bad thing. Sometimes stress is what allows us to kind of push to do bigger and stronger things. I mean, exercise essentially is stress on the body. That's how you actually get strength. So the concept of stress doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing, but it's how you manage it and how you kind of maintain yourself through it. And that seems to be like the overarching thing that I'm feeling as I'm listening to all of us talk, that I think is super important.
This conversation has been super important.
I just wanted to add to what he just said real quick. But I hear other folks chiming in as well. I don't want to cut anybody off.
Well, I don't want to cut off a beautiful Black man, and that's why we're going to get into our next video by Joshua Sarah.
Got it.
It's called Broken.
Start doing some beatnik poetry with the subway as the background. So look, sometimes people see me performing and they think I'm a good catch. I tell them that's just my Photoshop. I'm too lonely to be in a relationship. Look closer if you don't believe. Notice how the shadows layered under my eyes don't quite match the smile copied and pasted from my past. Come closer if you don't believe. Let your nostrils fill with the smoke of my burned lovers, the choke of I love yous that never made it past the throat. You should listen closer if you don't believe. You can hear heartache mocking me, making me its marionette. Like I'm just a fast-talking dummy, using your laughter to cover the obvious. This is just a show. Yeah, I'm fun. Like a house mirror, broken. And seeing your reflection in one of my shards may amuse you, but your love is not super glue. Don't try to put me back together, hoping that when I got my shit together, I can help you get yours together. Kiss me if you don't believe. Taste on my lips these dreams, bitter with abandonment. Replaced by naive wishes that all I needed to be happy was to make her happy. As if I was her dreams or she was mine, but how would you feel if after years of getting your goodies, I'm still emotionally unavailable? How will you look at yourself after I've had your best and you've excused my worst and you find I still got feelings for her? Does this sound like I should be committed to a relationship or a mental institution? I'm too lonely to even fuck you because I'd have to look in your eyes, share your breath, trace your neckline, adore you sweet. But you might like all that and want it again. But magicians only do their tricks once, so the illusion is not discovered. My emotional disappearing act will not entertain you. I don't want to have to explain to you why it's not working out for me. So it's best that we maintain our distant pleasantries. Like each other's comments online. Maybe hang out in groups, but don't fall for me. Yeah, you can come over if you don't believe. Let my constant jokes serve note that I'm not serious about you. Woo. Don't let my everyday hospitality fool you into thinking you special. Because even though I know you are, I will not alleviate your insecurities. I will not speak these well-earned compliments. I'll just let them dangle. I don't want you. I don't want your eyes smiling at me. How dare you think me sexy? Did you not see my face when my son passed? Maybe you looked away from my ugly divorce words, but I guarantee you a grown man in a dark corner in fetal position ain't cute. Brothers be broke, like mountains of back child support. And we know we can do better. So every day we wake up with shame, soggy with shame like a bedwetter. And don't know what to tell our woman since she in the same bed with us. I know you are not my opposite. You are my alternate chopstick. We gotta work together to feed each other. For now, I only have eyes for the spirit. Your breasts don't impress me, unless they in a baby's mouth. Your ass don't catch my attention unless you dance in the June Junes. Your sex is not inviting unless your bed is an altar and you shout prayers during orgasm. I appreciate that you see in me some kind of light, but before I get closer to you, I gotta get my self-love right.
Joshua Sarah is a friend of the show. He's been on the show at least once, but we do like showing his videos. And one thing that he's really big about is just like celebrating Black culture and the African diaspora. And so my next question for our panel is, how does culture affect our physical and mental health?
Oh, Lee looks like she's excited about this one.
Everyone's like, Well,
I mean,
we already started talking about diet.
I'm
right? And
sorry,
food is a
guys.
part of culture.
Nah, go for it, Lee.
I'm
The
just.
floor is yours.
Oh, go ahead.
The thing that the biggest thing for me, and I just discovered it last year, and it was like a eureka moment. But we have generational stress
Oh
as
yeah,
Black people. We were
yeah.
taught to watch our back from day one, since the moment that we arrived in the United States. Watch your back, watch your back, watch your back, because that's how we ultimately got here, not watching our back. And so we carry all this stress in our back. And I didn't know that. I didn't know I was carrying stress all along my back, not just right here where I feel it the most, but right here, like in the lower, the middle. And it's just because we're holding all that generational tension. And I took a workshop, a yoga workshop, just to alleviate some of that. And just like, even something as simple as hula hooping will help alleviate it. Just or just even knowing that you have that stress, that constantly having to watch your back, constantly being afraid of being hit in the back. I didn't know. I wasn't even thinking about that, but we do carry that, and it's unfortunate. But that's,
And it's not even that. It's not even as far back as all of that. I mean, it is that
yeah,
too. But like
yeah,
working in the service industry, like you see a lot of things, and I work in
yeah,
3 stores. One of them's on the Upper East Side. The other 2 are in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Very different people coming in. But one of the things that I realized, to piggyback right off of what Lee is saying,
mm,
is we're taught to be concerned with different things depending on where you come from, and
yeah,
Black people and people and impoverished people from many different races are always taught to be like super conscious, super hyper vigilant of like the rules in any given space that we enter into.
yeah,
Like, as a child, as soon as you walk into a place, your mother's like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and don't do this. And like, we
And
end up
don't ask
having,
me for nothing. Go ahead.
right.
Because the answer is already no.
Yeah.
But there's 2 primary sort of responses that I noticed. I'll speak specifically to Black men, because there's Black women here who could speak better to that experience. But for Black men, there's 2 specific responses that I feel like we end up what do you call it, taking on. One is being super aware of the rules and like not wanting to break any of them, and the other one is being super aware of the rules and going out of our way to oppose them, like to oppose the
yeah,
authority in any given situation. But
Mhm.
like both of those are not without the hypervigilance, or it's not without being aware of what the rules are. You know what I'm saying? And that's a different kind of stress too. Because I noticed, like, even when I go to places, when I used to travel, me and my ex-girlfriend, one of the first things we would do is check the laws in that and where we were going. It was like, what are the laws? What are the laws of revolving weed, jaywalking, like all of this shit? Like, because like when you go, you don't like. Who I don't want to be arrested in my own country, let alone be arrested in somebody else's country, especially when all countries are racist against
yeah.
Black people.
Agreed.
Especially because I was going to European countries, and especially, but
England started it.
I
there is
mean,
this.
the first slave traders were the Portuguese, so
I mean, it's all Europe.
they were trading for the longest.
But my point is, there is a cultural stress in being super aware of what the rules are in almost every given situation,
Yeah.
and like I'll go into stores. I think we've spoken about this on this podcast today. Like, I'll go into stores and be worried that I look like I'm going to steal something. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yeah.
Like, what kind of a concern is that? Because I know for a fact that I'm not going to steal something. Like, I know that, but somehow I'm worried about the appearance of how I look. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Get on
Yeah.
an elevator, or if I'm walking behind somebody at night, sometimes I just cross the street, not so they'll feel better, so I won't worry about them worrying about if I'm following them. As like, I don't want to deal with what's going on in my head, so I'll just cross the street. And there's a lot of stress that comes with that is embedded in the culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I jump in here? I think I'm reluctant to call a lot of what we do culture, because I think it's survival. I don't want that to. This is just my own little thing, right? Like, I don't want what the things we do to survive our existence to be conflated as culture. So personally, I'm resistant to the notion that we necessarily have a cultural diet, cultural, cultural form, music, dress, uh, dance, religious practices. Not because we don't have those things, but because many of the things that we collectively call culture are just survival mechanisms. And so I'm trying to think of the book or the scholar where he or she said that we don't know ourselves apart from trauma. And so quite what we think, who we think we are and think we do is just is just us trying to survive the trauma, right? um
I think
so
that's Dr. DeGraw. Dr. DeGraw.
oh, George, okay.
Yeah, I think it's post-traumatic slave. I think she
Post-traumatic slave, okay.
Yeah,
all right,
she said
all
that.
right. Thank you for that, Mikhail. um so you know, the always wanting to be entertaining, always having to smile, eye contact, having to cross the street for other people's sense of security, having to behave a certain way in stores, not patronize certain stores for the same reason. Hyper vigilant about the rules, you know, I mean, like all of those things. I'm reluctant to call any of those kinds of behaviors culture. Now, I know that culturally we are, you know, agriculture has always been a big thing. And so in all of the different places where you find Black Americans, um, a lot of them were built on top of farming communities, you know, and so I'm often interested in you know, like I was talking about Tallahassee, Florida, you know, boiled peanuts, watermelon, grapes, you know, like all those kinds of things. Like, okay, I hear that as culture. I think a lot of the stuff we consider soul food is not really our culture. It's just us having to survive eating, you know, what was effectively garbage at the time, you know, gruel, like real coarse cornmeal. I mean, now we call them grits, but you know, that was like stuff we ate out of a pig trough with a roof shingle.
Yeah. Or
You
even
know,
cakes.
oh yeah, okay, come on, yeah,
Because you fried them on a
yeah,
garden hose
yeah, right,
with
right.
some pig fat.
That's what I'm saying. Right, exactly. So it's not that we didn't do that, but just somewhere in my emotional makeup, I'm resistant to call that culture because we were having to survive a circumstance. That's not, we didn't think of doing that because that would elevate us into a higher state of consciousness. We were just trying to survive tyranny.
So do
And
you believe like participating in those things can also cause illness or cause?
Of course they can. But I mean, you know, it's like when you go home and your mother cooks a honey baked ham and dirty rice and green beans, and all, they're not trying to terrorize you. That's mother's love, as it were, or however we think of, you know, however we think of it. But I think the African American experience in particular needs a wholesale page one rewrite in terms of what we call culture, because we think abuse is part of our culture, and we
I
think
think it starts with us. It starts with our generation.
yeah, okay, yeah, I don't disagree, but I you know, like a lot of what we think of as Black culture is abusive and toxic and, you know, confused and based rooted in shame and all these kinds of things. And I'm like, I don't know. I know we've done a lot of those things. I don't know if that's our culture. I know that's a product of what we've had to survive.
Yeah.
But if we stop for a moment and give ourselves an opportunity to think, like, how much of what we think is culture do we actually even do? That's my thing. And I mean, of course, all of the coping mechanisms, you know, undermine your mental health because you steady trying to manage a crisis, you know. But pursuing that pursuing that homeostasis, or I think like if I would love to say Black culture is pursuing therapeutic means. Black culture is, trying to raise your level of consciousness, all these kinds of things. I would love for that to be what we think of as culture, rather than it's kind of like when someone is incarcerated, what they doing while they're incarcerated, that's not culture. That's them trying to survive being incarcerated. Right? But that's clearly not what they would be doing if they were not incarcerated.
But would you say there is a culture, like a prison culture? Like
it's surviving proximity to correctional officers.
I mean, I don't disagree with what you're saying, and I think the overall point is the fact that, like, what we look at as culture, a lot of it is trauma, and a lot of it is stress. But there is a part of me that if I examine the idea, is like what you do to survive sometimes is your culture, right? Like if you look at the Inuits, they skin the seals and whatever.
Yeah, right.
And that's what they do to survive. But then that also like becomes sort of like part of their culture, like So it's like the reason, like, I don't want to disagree with what you're saying wholesale, because like I believe at the core what you're saying is absolutely right. But I do think there is a part of, like, if we look at the songs that the enslaved people sang, is like becomes part of their culture, although it was also something that they did to survive, So it's
and
like
it helped carry certain traditions from Africa.
That's true,
but on a core level, I agree with you. On a very core level, is like a lot of this stuff that we look at as culture is because is something that was traumatic that happened to us. And that happens in individually too, right? Like people look back fondly on like things in their lives that like maybe weren't, like, my dad used to take me and go drinking and like, or something like that.
For sure.
I'd like to jump in if I could.
Go ahead.
I think the challenge when we talk about culture always is the fact that culture is there's not a definitive term for what culture is. Culture has a very kind of like broad-ranging idea. So like, really, to like Baxter and Jason's point, I think that many times if we're going to use a definition of culture, it's about traditions, practices, and rituals that reflect how a group of people associate and live. So there is something to be said that within a group of people, there are things that they do to survive that then take on aspects of what culture is. But like your example that you said, Baxter, with the Inuits skinning the seals as a means of survival, but there was also a particular way in how that was done and the reasons why it was done, and certain other rituals around that to reflect their connection to something larger or greater than themselves. So when we think about things that may be in the African American tradition as culture, I think what I hear Jason saying is that let's connect to the things that get us to a deeper, stronger connection to something that's greater than ourselves, and we have those things within our existence here, even in the States. But when we think about, say, sagging your pants is gang culture or it's prison culture because you weren't allowed to have belts because of suicide, that's not a cultural thing, as more of like, as what Jason's saying, is like a circumstance that has to happen because of the reality of you surviving. I think, and it's difficult because we have such a very strange understanding of that idea of culture. We almost say everything's culture, but in truth, I think that a lot of what we think of, or what I think we should think of when we're thinking of culture, is like, what are the rituals, traditions, and practices that bring us to kind of a connective understanding? So it can be things like work songs. It can be things like movement, because when we trace those things back to what Dale was saying, those things are rooted in indigenous African spiritual understanding or connection to the land, which ultimately is a spiritual understanding. So you did these things to give thanks to or to reflect your connection to X, Y to the Z. So it had a purpose more than just surviving, but a way to identify and connect with others that are of a similar mind, of a similar body. But if we're saying like, yeah, like I'm throwing up these things to get my set and that's my culture, it's like, well, yes, but that's also something kind of like separate and different. And I think that's what's challenging about like what we're talking about a little bit, because it's all true, correct or yes, but it also like there is some distinct like branches off of that. We're like, well, nah, this culture is a little bit different.
Right.
But I also go ahead, good Dale.
I would, because culture has different facets, right? And
Right.
part of it is, yes, diet, part of it is music, part of it is dance. And I really want to hear Stephanie's opinion from a dancer and from a dance therapist about how that culture or how like dance has affected us.
Yeah, I absolutely, sorry, I was just taking what everyone was saying and also, again, thinking of it from an embodied perspective. I oftentimes think that our bodies, like, I think we're all movers, and I think our bodies tell our stories. I think what I'm tapping into specifically through hearing this part of the conversation is the idea of like intergenerational, generational, historical legacies. And I appreciate what Jason was talking about specifically around like really understanding and indigenizing or decolonizing our encounters with culture. So that could be family culture, it could be ethnic culture, racial culture. Really looking at it from an intersecting social identity perspective. And then as a mover, how do we show up in these different settings? How do we show up in these different cultures? What are our mirrors? What are our points of representation within this? So even as you guys are talking about, like, prison culture, for example, there's a whole different way in which perhaps folks stereotype and or if it's your lived experience, embody protection and confidence and or the complete opposite in their bodies. So I think like as a mover, as an embodied practitioner, I think it's all very interconnected, but also very individualistic. How we respond to our families' generational, I say legacies because sometimes they can be amazing gifts and sometimes they can be very harmful things that we're ingesting or around or experiencing. And how our body responds to that, I think, is something that is super intuitive. Again, in different settings, you may have access to yourself or access to your own self-awareness to be able to really unpack that. Sometimes things have to happen for you to like realize what's actually going on in this way. Like, oh, actually, why do I'm Caribbean, so I'll definitely name like how I respond to music is probably going to be in my pelvic area, right? Or, I'll have a verbal response that's like very expansive for example, and that could be related to so many different microcosms of culture, right? So I think on a personal level, I definitely, would encourage folks to explore this idea of, what was stuff that were passed down to me on a body based of like, where is that sitting? When I hear 80s dancehall or I hear, I see a certain visual or nostalgic visual from my childhood, like where does that kind of impact me on a body based level? Am I breathing? Does it stop my breath, for example? And where does that come from? Is this a traumatic response or a way of survival, speaking like what folks were saying before, that I've inherited and internalized on a body-based level? Is this something that I want to relinquish? Is this something that I want to step away from? So this concept of decolonizing or indigenizing our inherited culture, I think is something that I personally would say starts with the body. And it also starts in relationship as well. So who are we talking? Who are we investing in, and definitely from African diaspora perspective, I think is a helpful kind of lean towards understanding our own culture, our own individual and collective cultures. Yeah.
You. Yes. Yes, leaving a round of applause.
Really quick, I wanted to take it in a slightly different direction because you said that the basically the question was, does culture affect our physical health? And I'm glad that we really focused on our culture. But when I heard that and I saw that question, my first thought actually went to American culture, because I feel like in terms of what it means to be an American and really capitalism, because I feel that, for example, the fact that a work week is only considered a full work week is if it's a minimum of 40 hours. And that productivity is not measured in actual production, but in actual time, right? So
how much you're actually sitting at your office as opposed to how much you got done.
Right. So I could be productive, highly productive, produce reports, deliver programming, consult students, etc. And I could do that maybe in 6 hours. Or let's say even 4 hours in a given day. But I'm not going to be credited with what that service or what those tasks are unless it is stretched, perceived otherwise, to 8 hours. And there's an effect that has on me as a person, physically and emotionally, because now I'm trying to find ways, in essence, to be in compliance with a system that doesn't logically make sense. I think about the pace in which that we are asked to live. This is something that I've really reflected on, thankfully, because I've had the fortune of traveling and visiting other places, Africa, Europe, South America, Asia, several times. And the pace in which we feel that is necessary is very much a capitalist idea. Has to happen now, has to happen quickly, got to get it, whatever have you. We are a culture of convenience. We practice that. It is the way in which we move. It is the way in which we relate to one another. Everything is built around moving quickly. I think about, I have friends of mine that are single. They use dating apps. Everything is about getting to the person and the idea as soon as possible. They look like this, they say this, swipe, boom, we're set up, we're go, and we're going to get it going. So everything is kind of rushed and pushed and sped up in a way that is very difficult to unmoor yourself from in this particular place, because this is how most of us relate, especially when you live in a large city like New York. So when I saw that question, I started to think about not so much black culture or our culture in terms of its effects, because I think, it's funny, Stephanie's talking about like feeling like, when she hears like 80s dance hall, like if everybody saw Dale last night at this wedding when like 90s trap R&B came on, yeah, she was
playing Trina, so I was happy.
Yeah, she was starting the show. She had every line memorized and twerking all over the place, and she was in her element. And I feel that way when I hear house music. Like the minute I hear like some straight up just like Jersey 90s house music, it's a whole different thing for me. Like my body does completely different things, and I'm very much at peace. Dancing actually is something that I really miss. But yeah, when I thought of that, it's like I'm dreading going back to my job, because I've found so much peace working from home, because I work at my pace. I'm not running to a train. Even if I was like doing something healthier, like even if I had a bike and doing it, it's still like I gotta get here to punch in, and the meeting starts in 30 minutes about nothing, and we're gonna have a meeting an hour from that about the same thing that's nothing. And I could have just did the task if you gave me a note on my email, and we could have cleared all that. Now I can do that from home. And I thought about that as like, I think the thing that affects me most in my physical, my emotional, is really just like living in this sort of like capitalist culture of this like need to constantly be moving, constantly producing, constantly showing a thing, even if the reality is like, well, that doesn't really actually matter, or this actually needs to take a lot more time and care than you want to give it, but I have to do it in 5 minutes because, you know, that's what's necessary. Or even though I know I don't need 80 hours for this, but if I want to get paid for 80 hours of this, I need to make it look like it's 80 hours of this. The levels of stress around those things is really something that has, you know, it won't get TMI, and Dale could tell you, like, it's severely affected me from a physical and emotional standpoint.
I also believe America has a culture of violence, like starting from at the very beginning when Europeans got here and the way they arrived and what they did and the way they brought people here. Even like not just talking about Black people, but if we're like the state of Georgia was initially a state, so like the English just sent a bunch of unruly Irish there, you know, expecting them to like die. Like all these instances of violence, and the way we run our society up until 2021, like it's all based in violence, and that's like the initial reaction. Someone commits a crime, the initial reaction is they need to get arrested, they need to get like thrown down and put in handcuffs. Like even that action, it's like, did they?
Well, Dale, to your point, if I can just jump in real quick, again, a lot of us don't even know ourselves apart from the circumstance you're describing, which is why I'm reluctant to ascribe the word culture to it. I find one of the things that a lot of us do, I remember just quickly, my mother married my wife and I in our backyard. And at one point, the train, we live near an elevated train, and it was going by, so it was loud for, 20 seconds or whatever. And my mother, she turned to my wife to be and said, "Put your eyebrows down, relax." And what I realized is that it's a very common thing for us to be in this kind of, constantly tense state that we show in our face without saying anything, but our eyebrows are up. And what I started to kind of follow that down a rabbit hole, in terms of research, and I realized there's fascia that goes from our eyebrows back and down, and you're like all the way to our toes, and it's just tension, like holding us into this kind of this state. And it's deep because after a while it becomes calcified, and we're just constantly like on edge, like just tense. And like I find with Black men, we do things like when we sit down, we brace ourselves with the chair, like something getting ready to happen, or there's a thing where we press our tongue into the roof of our mouth, or like somebody said, we grit our teeth. Like, we could just be sitting there listening, and we're doing all of these other things that's just creating more and more tension because we, like we getting ready for the other shoe to drop, or we getting ready for something to happen. You know what I mean? Like we waiting on that Acme anvil to fall on our head, or we all these other kinds of things. And I think in terms of the culture.
Sorry, that's funny because I used to watch Tiny Toons Adventures.
So you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like we waiting on that moment, and it's deep because we like, man, when you go other places and you realize that there is a world possible where you can relax as much as you work. And part of it is like a lot of us, we're just working for healthcare. We just working for for dental insurance, or we just working so we can pay child support, or we just working for a thing that people in other parts of the world don't even consider, but I think if we can get past all of that, then we can start to say, okay, these are survival mechanisms, but this is culture, and they're not the same while they might be happening at the same time,
Yes.
I need to read that book, brother. You need to write that book.
I'm still in class, man. I'm just trying to, I'm just taking notes.
Because
So we've been
I
talking
hear you,
about.
and it's not that I don't agree with you, but there's just so many things going through my mind. Like as an Aquarius, it's hard for me to like hear you say that hardships aren't exactly a culture, but there's so many things that are glorified within the African American. Well, I don't even want to say African American, the Black American
Go
um
ahead. Uh-huh.
race, as far
Yeah.
as like that has come from hardships,
Mhm.
especially when you think about music,
Like,
jazz,
what's an example of what you're talking
hip
about?
hop. Well, jazz is one of them. I would assume.
I'm just saying, when you say
There's music.
glorified hardship, like, what do you?
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying
Jazz
that's
is a
it.
glorified hardship.
Well, it's not
Well,
a
now
glorified.
let me
It
list.
came out of glorified
It
hardship. Is
came
that what
out
you
of a
said?
hardship, and
Okay.
so now it's glorified as like epitome of what music should be. At least that's what I think of. Like when I
Okay.
hear jazz, I'm like, oh, it's so beautiful.
Uh-huh.
And so, how could we say that that's our culture, but then there's other things that we aren't exactly proud of is in our culture. It's still like ingrained, it's still taught, it's still some some things that we can that we continue to talk about. So how could we like not say that that's culture, but then other things are?
What's an example of one of the bad things you're talking about?
Well, an
You
example
blocking
is
everything.
I
yeah,
didn't.
like
Well, I didn't hear what you said.
Oh,
like
what I
having to watch our back like in
Uh-huh.
stores. Um like the assumption that we like to wear our pants sagging,
Uh-huh.
things like that. Like a lot of the
Okay.
hip hop culture is a little
Yeah.
bit shunned upon right now too. But it's something that it came from an uncomfortable space,
Yeah.
an
See,
uncomfortable space.
I would just say that a lot of what people think is our culture is what white people say our culture is, and not actually what we do. I think I would argue that half of what people say hip hop is just what white folks said they thought we was doing, or what they wanted other people to think we were doing between 1979 and 2003. I don't actually think we
Yeah,
do
there was
most of what. I mean, just so many of the stereotypes that folks assign to black people. Not because we never did them, but my life uh, experience is such that we have never fully embodied the stereotypes assigned to us. We've always
yeah,
been a lot more varied and a lot more, um, a lot less, a lot more humane than the stereotypes would suggest.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a duality here, right? Because
Okay.
like culture isn't just specifically all the positive stuff, right? Like there's never negative aspects of people's cultures as well, and that goes like for everybody's culture,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I do think there's a huge validity into like what you're saying, because like we don't black Americans don't know a culture that isn't directly othered by whiteness. You know what I'm saying? So
Correct.
it's like
yeah,
so a lot of what you're saying is it makes perfect sense. It's like our culture is what whiteness says it is because it doesn't exist outside of white American culture, like white American culture being the dominating culture
Mm-hmm.
for most of the history of America, and black American culture just being sort of like the other of that, because
Mm-hmm.
even when other uh peoples come here, they're still doing their culture here. So it's like an Irish American is like, yes, it's my culture from there, but here, where like black Americans, our culture is erased from where we're coming from. So
Right.
it is the most valid American culture, but we don't know what that is without the heel of
Yeah.
white
Right.
culture
Right.
pushing
Right.
down on it. So like while I don't know if I would go as far as to say that it's not culture, I would
Mm-hmm.
say that like it's not pure culture. It's not it's not what we would do if left to our own devices.
yeah.
It's not
Right.
even what we would think is the best things for us to do.
Right.
Like,
We're
like
just trying to survive right now.
right. We would
So
like
that's what we're
who
doing.
But
who
there are things that people do, some things that are stereotypical of people in the African diaspora, and that's smoking weed. And Leah V is talking about smoking weed in her poem Medicaid.
Segue, Dale.
Sylvia said she's exploring her subconscious self-repression. My repression involves the suppression of smoke, simple squanderings around embers, omitted, dismembered duchess, disheveled and pebbled with memories of September's come past. I allow my inhaled escape to emulate exposed egos, attempt to cover and cower behind clouds of calling vapors. You, my neighbors, will you escape beside me? Will you ignore the ignorance even after it pierces your privacy? Even after it pierces your private party and the pieces of you you place precariously in your pockets? And will you addict yourself, as I have, in hopes that you can hover above these men who hate you, who threaten to hallucinate you with their hands ready to sedate you, snatch you, and taste you? It's an irrational fear, but the statistics say otherwise. But Mary unifies, and as the sun rises and I raise myself off comfortable covers, my very first thought is always, how soon can I ignite? How soon can I insert my fake sense of security into this service fee-taking mouth? How many mammoth-moving minutes until this green piece can move my mental capacity into other dimensions? Is it deception? It is. I know, and yet still I fold tobacco cloves as I pose beside smoke, and I choke, and I toke, and I break my composure, engage in overexposure, wearing these blood-colored eyes, reading, this is a full disclosure. But Mary balances boulders. She breaks these brain boundaries and she massages your shoulders as earth shakes and shatters with shit-talking government soldiers who pose next to murderers in suits, diluting the truth, trading our tragedies for power-pelling polling booths, completely obtuse, corrupt, and obtrusive, policing our youth while already grasping that noose. And because of these unfortunate truths, I make the choice to choose. If we cannot be physically free as we ache against this concrete, then allow me a calm heartbeat, a piece of the sweetest leaf, temporary relief, my fleeting inner peace. Allow me to elevate so that I can de-escalate, so that as I deflate, brutal reality may briefly escape. Thank you.
That was Leah V with Medicaid. And we've had such a lively conversation. We touched on a lot of different things, and this next question is going to kind of tie a lot of what we are talking about together. We've talked about alternative therapies, yoga, physical activity in order to help you both your mental and your physical health, right? But what is your opinion specifically about alternative therapies in order to heal physical ailments? Alternative therapies, yoga therapy, art therapy, dance therapy, pet therapy. A lot of people don't realize there's a pet therapy. So what are your thoughts?
I'll say
my therapist just came in the house.
Aww.
In.
Beautiful.
Greta is a therapist. The dog.
I'll say I wish people would the world is presented to us a certain way, right? Like we get here and people are like, this is the way that things work. And I often think sometimes like we would do better to look outside of the way things are like often presented to us. And I'll just this may be a little off, but I think it'll land. So I'll just say this. There was a point in time in my life that I had like a discoloration on my skin, right? And I go to a dermatologist and I talk to this dermatologist and I'm like, discolor, what's going on? And he's like, oh, there's this fungus that is naturally growing on skin. It's overactive on yours. Here's a prescription for this cream, some sort of a chemical cream, whatever. I lost the prescription. never got around to getting it or whatever. But one time I used tea tree oil in my hair, and there was one time where I used it as a moisturizer, and I noticed that it helped. Didn't like do a great job of getting rid of it, but it helped. So then I like started researching tea tree oil, and tea tree oil is a natural antifungal. You know what else is a natural antifungal? Coconut oil. Started using coconut oil, knocked it out. It's gone, right? But then I realized, like, this dermatologist, I don't like. I'm not one of these people that have like a vendetta against, medicine or whatever. It's like, it's not that they knew about this and didn't tell me or something like that. It's just that, like, that's not the way that they were trained to think or to deal with problems. Like, doctors aren't trained to like talk to you about your diet. Like, that's not what they go to medical school for. But that is a large part of medicine, huge part of medicine, and it's like, so there's a way of looking at things where you need to take what is established. I'm never saying don't go to a doctor, but you also need to kind of like look at things in your own way. So even saying like alternative therapy, it's like, should you be thinking about ways of making yourself feel better that are outside the parameters of what people say? All the time. Yes, 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 yes. Like, I don't necessarily think of it as alternative therapy. Like, getting a pet, is that alternative therapy, or do you have a
Some
pet?
people don't think of it as a therapy. They're like, I just want a dog. It's like, why do you want a dog? A lot of
I
people
mean,
want a dog because they're lonely.
give you a sense of purpose, give you a sense of camaraderie. But I'm just saying, you should
My
always
dog
be
listens to me.
listen. Sometimes that's what you need. I'm just saying, you should always be engaging life in a way where you're trying to figure out like what is most true. You know what I'm saying? And what is most like real, and that goes beyond what is given to you as like the parameters of life. Yeah. So like alternative therapy, figure yourself out.
Yes. Any other thoughts?
I'm trying to give as much space to everyone else because I can talk.
I would like to know, like, Stephanie, what in your profession, have you come up against certain roadblocks or criticisms of what you do?
Absolutely. Literally, I mean, I'll stay here. Like, and outside of Jason, how many folks really know what dance movement therapy is? I oftentimes hear people say, "Oh, so you're a dance teacher? Oh, nice. So they're gonna open a studio." This idea of being able to be reflective and process feelings and experiences outside of the expectations of verbal languaging is oftentimes not necessarily like oh yeah, that makes sense. So I definitely know my experience as a DMT where it's oftentimes, and we're trained in grad school around this, but the reality hits very quickly where you're always kind of advocating for nonverbal communication and the importance of it and how that can inform so many interactions that we have. So it's a very constant thing. I think also because we fall under the umbrella of expressive arts therapy and creative arts therapy, it's oftentimes met with this idea of like, oh, creative, that's not me, or I'm creative in a performative way, meaning I am a performer. It's a very transactional and very distinct concept of who I am, as opposed to being like, whoa, I actually really get my thoughts out when I'm able to journal, or I have a drum set and I can like bang out a whole rhythm, and that like really actually alleviates a lot of stress. I can do songwriting related to what's going on, even if it's just for me in this way. So this idea of kind of also what like Baxter was saying of like, really stretching beyond what supports currently exist, which is, within the medical field, also within the mental health field, but also saying maybe my mental wellness practice or my creative wellness practice needs to have an acupuncturist. It probably needs to have a medical doctor as well as a homeopathic doctor. Or I need to have someone who's really affirming and understands mental wellness, who's also a pastor, as like my support person. Really diversifying and at least as an investment, investing in I oftentimes say your mental wellness and your creative wellness. And again, we talked about it before, not everyone will have access to this in this way. There's a cost, because we do live in a capitalist environment. There's a cost to everything. But again, also touching on what Jason said as well, some of these things, it's not necessarily with the cost, right? It's, I think, also just the mental practice of like, actually, I would like to, have a space to process my feelings, but these are the ways in which, or just really even connect to self, really create a body oriented practice. Oftentimes in a space where you're the only one, like we talked about culture before, but I'm kind of zoning in on culture, on family culture, where you may be an outlier. You may be the only one who's like, actually, I don't want to eat whatever traditional meal that we usually have at Thanksgiving, or I actually just want to drink more water, or instead of coming home and I'm not knocking Netflix because it's a whole vibe sometimes, but instead of like watching a whole series and binge watching, I'm actually gonna walk around the park today and be outside. You're oftentimes an outlier in that way. So it's nothing new. But it's also, I think, just such an interesting investment in yourself. And I do oftentimes pray for my clients, and like when I say pray, I'm saying that figuratively, in the sense of like, I really hope for them that they have or can continue to cultivate environments within their existing relationships, or perhaps build new relationships that can help them sustain this practice. Because it's not oftentimes you're like the only one who's like, oh, I actually don't want to eat meat anymore, or like I'm wanting to explore trauma. Like, what does that mean? The big T, little T, whatever. What does that mean in my life? Because I hear people throw it around, or which I get oftentimes, like this idea of internalizing what a certain diagnosis is, which oftentimes isn't necessarily what it really is on paper. It's more what the culture that you're socialized in kind of, or like looking at social media or even movies, like sensationalize it or romanticize certain diagnoses, also within certain ethnic groups and certain racial groups. So as a dance therapist, they're like, well, how can you really help me? And I'm often like, let's start with a conversation. Like, and it's around the conversation of like, in your family growing up, did you ever hear the words mental health? What was the responses to that? And really just starts a conversation for them to start to unpack, like, where does this live, and what is this interest about? What am I hoping to achieve in connecting to my body and my experiences more? So I'm always advocating or like doing psychoeducation around body oriented practices. And because I also specialize with birthing families, it's this idea of attachment. So, for, folks who are parents here, it's what is your reference point to be in terms of parenting? Like, who have been your guides, and what are some ways in which that you want to, going back to the intergenerational legacies, you want to pull on some of these legacies, and what legacies you're like, I'm a part that right quick because I don't want to necessarily pull that into my parenting style, for example. So it's very interactive. It's all about collaboration too, in that way. And representation, I'm gonna put that on the books. I think really aligning with whether it's, again, a community leader or a therapist or an alternative practitioner who has more of an understanding of your intersection cultural identities. And I'll just make it be very general in that way. That has more of a reference point to be able to hold space for you, I think is really important.
Yes,
But it was a lot.
It's great. Thank you.
I see a naturopath, and it's the first doctor that I've trusted in my adult life. And he's in New York City. I'm a plug him. His name is Christopher Saltpaw, and he's like I said, he's the first doctor that I have actively trusted. Like I accept what he says, because when I first went to go see him, he said, "Well, okay, we're gonna do blood work. Are you seeing a therapist? Because you probably need one, even for the stuff you don't think is wrong. Even if you think you had it pretty good growing up, you probably need one just to, you know what I'm saying, make sure everything is cool." He said, I want you to see, can you get a couple of more hours sleep at night? And I want to make sure you're hydrated, and he hadn't tried to sell me anything yet. He says, so we do acupuncture. I see, you turn your head when I talk to you. Are you deaf on one side? I said, yeah, I am. He said, but you weren't born like that. I mean, like, he just starts to unpack my whole thing. And you know, I came into his office pretty good, you know. So we did blood work. He goes, "Wow, you're doing better than most people. There's still some things I would like to see improve." Um, but for me, alternative medicine or non-conventional therapeutic means have been the only things that I found as an adult that work for me. Um, and also, I think a lot of what we think of as care is the ability to afford prescriptions. And I think as far as Black people are concerned, like none of us were in the decision making rooms when this stuff was concocted. Like none of this was built for our betterment. So, even for me to even like, without going too far down the rabbit hole, just like traditional medicine is to do with selling products. It's based on profit. And it might prolong your life, but it does not necessarily improve your life. It just prolongs it. Because healthy people that don't eat medicine are not profitable at all. You know. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Jason.
All I was just gonna say, because you do the alley, but I'm gonna leave it, is simply it's interesting that we call it alternative medicine the things that have been around for centuries that are rooted in science.
Right.
But the only reason why we call it alternative is because, to your point, Jason, Western medicine has decided that it is what we consider health and health care. So there has to be a way to other something that would be competing with that. And it always, there's a little thing that kind of like cricks me when the term alternative medicine is used. Like, the alternative to what? Why it is the alternative? Because it built in that is inherent. The idea is like it's not as good. It's
right.
In addition to. It's if you can't get the actual medicine, but when you deepen research and you think about it, you're like, yeah, it's really just the fact of, yeah, healthy people are, yeah, they're not profitable.
Yeah, that's why they even call it alternatives, just so we could have that in our mind. You're right. It's just kind of like it's a curve or a trick, if you will. But yeah, I've I've never really liked doctors either. I've never really trusted them. Like, even my best friend in high school, she grew up to be a pharmacist, and I'm still kind of like, I just feel like um we would just get so much further if we were um on a more natural approach. Like, even something as simple as the seasonings that we put in our food are already the seasons that we crave, especially, are the ones that are the most effective, like turmeric and cayenne pepper, garlic. All of them have medicine, healing properties that are just not considered or not even thought of, because somebody can't make a profit off of it. Somebody can't pull it in pill form, although they do. And then they add like gelatin to it and something else, and a whole bunch of salt and stuff that you shouldn't be taking. And they just sell it to you that way. But I believe in herbs. I believe in roots. I believe in, alleviating stress. And if that's alternative, then that's the road that I'm gonna go by. I love acupuncture too. And I forgot, what is it called with your foot?
Reflexology.
Reflexology.
Yes, that's my joint.
I did want you to speak a little bit about like a little bit more, because you brought up crystals earlier, about like how you feel crystal work helps.
Oh yeah, crystal work. Okay. Well, I mean, every single crystal has different properties, and it's you really have to be kind of careful with crystals, and it does depend on how spiritually open you are, and also um how well you do take in energies. For somebody like me, I take in whatever I touch, and so crystals have played a great role in that, especially with healing. When I did have a stomach infection, I would line certain crystals onto my stomach. Oh my God, I think it was the rose jasper that I used on my stomach, and I would just sit it on there. Or my friend Andy, I'm gonna shout out Andy Croston. He made me an actual necklace that went around. It was a body chain that held my quartz, so I could hold it directly on my stomach as I was healing, and it was just serving as a way to like just take the stress or just take my mind out of what was going on around me and just helping me relax, if you will.
Yeah. One thing, like people, with crystals and physical ailments or the way illness shows up in the physical in a physical way, a lot of
Yeah,
people think it's silly that it could possibly, help shift energy, but like if
but it
everything
does.
has energy, right? And everything
Yeah.
has a certain vibration, then like naturally adding something to your body is going to change and shift that vibration.
Hmm.
Because we're water, so we operate vibrations, and that goes into sound healing and things
Oh
like that,
yeah.
which all of us work in audio sound, so we
I left
all
my
we
singing
feel that,
bowl in
right?
the living room. Forgive me. I would have needed
No
it.
worries. Um, so I've loved this conversation. I feel like I've learned so much and felt like very connected to all of you in this conversation. And I'd like to hear everyone's final thoughts. Mikal, what are your final thoughts?
Yeah.
This has just been, this has been wonderful. Stephanie, thank you for being here and your perspective, as well as Jason and Lee. I guess I wish and hope that these types of conversations were just happening more. It's great that we're here together in this podcast doing it, and there's many people that will be able to view and watch this and be a part of the conversation in some way. I would love and hope that we all are just having these conversations when there's not a camera rolling, and specifically us Black people, because I think a lot of the answers that we've all talked about for ourselves are things that are super accessible. You don't need $1 million. You don't need a healthcare benefit plan. It's just about some knowledge and some understanding, and I think that's what I hope. So this has been great. It's been dope.
Thank you. Baxter, what are your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are another piece of advice. Something that I do that brings me great joy is stretch, stretch, stretch. Wherever you are in your life, whatever you're doing, no matter how old you are or how young
Yes.
you are, like if you make it a habit to stretch, you will feel slightly better in your circumstance. And it's not going to improve every circumstance. If you're locked up in prison, you're locked up in prison. But if you stretch while you're locked up in prison, it'll make it a tiny bit more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And I do
that's what I'm
think
saying.
like stretching mentally and physically, right? Like not
Well,
thinking
Yeah.
outside the
uh,
Read a
box.
book.
specifically physically, like we're tight in places. I mean, you guys do yoga, so you're tight in places in your body you don't even know you're tight in until you stretch, until you feel the resistance, and then stretching it out, loosening yourself up for a little bit, you feel better. You feel better.
Hmm.
Anyway,
Yeah.
that's my final word.
Thank you,
Stretch.
Baxter. Lee, what are your final thoughts?
Ooh, okay. My final thoughts. Well, first off, I really enjoyed everything. Nice to see you, Mikal and Baxter and Dale and Jade. Nice to meet you, Jason and
Pleasure
Stephanie.
as well.
Yay. And yeah, I what I took from it is a lot of good vibes and a lot of helpful things that I will be rewatching and writing down. I didn't write down now because I definitely wanted to listen. But the last little tidbit that I would add is look to your parents. Like they will give you so many answers that you didn't know that you would be able to find through a book or going through a doctor if you want to go to a doctor. I'm not. But just looking at your parents and how they ate when they were your age, how they acted when they were in their 20s, because that will just give you a lot of insight and just come to the realization. I said it out loud. I was like, I don't want to be like my dad. I don't want to be like my dad. And so what steps can I make so I'm not like my dad? And they're there. Just ask questions. And like the same thing that happened to, sorry not to put you on blast, Dale, but the same thing that happened to my sister, same thing that happened to my mom, the same thing that happened to my grandma.
Yeah.
So, and she's able to like navigate it because you just know what your parents have gone through. So look to your parents and decide that you're not going to be like them.
Yes. Thank you, Lee. Stephanie, what are your final thoughts?
Like many folks have said before, I'm still like ingesting the whole conversation. It was a very rich conversation. I think where it's kind of landing for me is this reminder about the importance of our relationship with our bodies as a very primary investment. I know that sounds like a very capitalistic word, but just really being intentional about understanding our bodies. And I appreciate Leah even just mentioning right now the genetic components of that, and how do we kind of create our own legacy from a somatic standpoint. So what can we unlearn and relearn and try differently to be able to connect more to ourselves. I also often, as well, just want to offer that folks consider to be collaborative in their exploration, where it feels healthy and safe and brave to do so, and familiar to do so. So we're talking a while ago about alternative therapies, which I think a lot of us can also tap into things that are way more accessible. We're all moving beings. We are communicative. We are creative. We are literally moving through our lives every day. So how do we create inventory of what is benefiting us and what isn't? And then how do we transition that within ourselves and within our community or within collaborative relationships to be able to strive for a more holistic life that, as I said before, maybe the first in your family or the first in your friend group. But it's really a lasting intention for yourself. Yeah, so I was just bringing it back to the body. I know that there are alternative therapies out there for Black and brown folks. So yeah, we out here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jason, what are your final thoughts?
Gratitude, first of all. Thank y'all for having me. Thank y'all for tolerating my lengthy responses to every last thing.
I'm just glad you didn't tell me to stop eating a slave diet. That will always stay with me. You were like, stop eating that slave diet, Dale. And I was like, it was just collard greens. There was no meat in it.
I ate collard greens too.
Well, maybe it was something else, but that sticks with me.
It was something else, but yeah, I hear you. So what? All I'll say is that, to me, our focus should be wellness primarily, right? And you know, I wrote in the chat that a lot of us we don't even know, but we have a religious objection to wellness. You know, because Jesus want me to have a honey baked ham and green beans with turkey wing in it, and and 17 rolls with butter on it, and then whatever.
And then just clock out, just sleep.
It just, you're in a food coma for the rest of the day. Yeah. And I'm not against food, and I'm not against people practicing a spiritual system that works for them. But I think on evidence, most of what we practice doesn't work for us. And so we can call it whatever we want. But I think that whatever we do has to result in our benefit and betterment and overall wellness and lifespan extension. And you know what I'm saying? Like it should whatever we do, it should obviously work. And to that end, I would say, if you read a Bible, it should be the one that you wrote. Because it must necessarily reflect you in your daily existence.
Mikhail's like, I need more information.
That's a bar. That's all. I'm stealing that.
Go ahead.
I'll quote you, but
okay, all right, you got it, man.
That's hard, bro.
The next Mikhail album, the next Hired Gun album.
I'm just saying, if that's the book that you basing your life on, you better have wrote it yourself. And then uh same like if you practice in a religion that don't where your wellness ain't the first and last thing, then what are you doing? Because that's all we got at the end of all of this. Like, are you okay or are you not? You know, the people you care about, all you actually care about is if they are right or not. So whatever your practice is, however you call it, you know, whichever books or texts you assign to it, they got to start and end with your wellness. So I'll leave it like that.
Thank you, Jason. And Jade, I'm gonna put you on the spot. What are your final thoughts?
All about being well. I think, yeah, just listen to your body. Talk to your body, listen to it, stretch. Yeah, eat when you're hungry and stop eating when you feel full. Yeah, but just listen to your body. I was blessed. I had my mom was a nurse, so she taught me a lot of things. But most importantly, that it's all about how you feel. You know, I remember one of the things that she would do when I would get sick, like at school. You know, you get sick and you have to like she would come and pick me up and go home. She would give me McDonald's on the way home, and she would tell me like it's not because McDonald's is good for you. It's because it's your favorite food and it's gonna make you feel good and it's gonna like stimulate yourself. Like you eat your favorite food, we're gonna eat that, and then dinner we'll have a great chicken soup or whatever it is. But just pray to your food and it'll take care of you.
Thank you, Jade. So one last show of gratitude for all of y'all for being on the show on the newly minted Poets to the People, and we're gonna take it out with good music from the Trainwalkers.
Beautiful.